everyone, this is Kim Swanner with KimandCaboodle.com and VisArts Center in Rockville, Maryland. We are going to be talking about glazing today, most specifically how to prepare your pieces for glazing and then also dipping your pieces into a glaze. So I will have a separate video for brushing your glazes, but for the time being, this is our dipping video. So right here we've got two bowls that I have made. And the first thing that I'm going to do is actually optional. So notice I have, this is optional, but I do recommend that you do this in order to make your work area easy to clean up and work in, is that put some newspaper down or any sort of paper that can be disposable. You cannot reuse this, you cannot recycle this. So please, once you have used newspaper for glazing, do not put it back to reuse again. Do not try to just shake it loose. Please immediately dispose of it when you are done glazing, because when the glaze dries, it turns into little tiny little particles that you breathe in. And that means you're breathing in glass and minerals and other sorts of chemicals and things that go into your glazes. So please, 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 just as soon as you're done glazing, everything's off the table, you roll that newspaper up and throw it away. This is at home, this is in the studio, this is at VisArts. Please throw your newspaper away when you are done using it. Do not try to reuse it again. Do not leave it for someone else to reuse. So that's a big warning there. But in order to make your lives a little bit easier when it comes to finishing your work, you can wax the bottom of your piece. Now this bowl is for the VisArts Empty Bowls project that we usually do in October. So I have a nice clean brush that is used for waxing. We at VisArts have brushes that we use just for waxing, and they are in a nice cubby that says wax only. You do not want to mix your wax brushes and your glaze brushes. Again, do not mix your wax brushes and your glaze brushes, because once the wax dries on these, it's very hard to clean out, and you do not want wax in your glaze. It's gross, it messes up your work. So wax for ceramics usually comes in a liquid form, and you just put your brush in it. You want to wipe that brush off because a little wax goes a long way. And then wherever that wax touches, that's it. It's on. And the only way to remove it is to bisque fire your piece again. That means firing up to at least cone 0.5. I mean, you could fire it lower. That's fine too. You could get it to about 400 degrees, 500 degrees, and it'll melt off. But wherever that wax is, that's it, it's there, done. So if you're like hoping to wax and glaze on the same day, then you've got to be very careful and pay attention to what you're doing. The worst thing is if you like accidentally like flick your brush and wax goes on your piece where you don't want it. That's no fun at all. So take your time, pay attention to what you're doing. And as soon as you are done waxing, as soon as you're done, go ahead and wash that brush off. That way it stays nice as possible. So I have a little thing of water here, so I can really wash that brush off, get it nice and clean, wax free, and that's it, good to go. Make sure you keep your wax closed. It does dry over time, and when it's dry, it's just not fun. I will say, because I've been cleaning the studios here at VisArts, and I have been able to clean all of these lovely wax brushes, it takes boiling hot water to clean your wax brushes when the wax is dry. So keep in mind that you can clean your brushes if the wax does dry on them. So if you, well, maybe not accidentally, maybe you want to use a really nice calligraphy brush for a specific detail with the wax, just keep in mind that it does take a lot of cleaning, and you really don't want to use like your really nice expensive brushes that are meant for glazing. But sometimes you do, sometimes detail work's important, and you want to do that with wax. By all means, just make sure you're cleaning your brushes and taking care of them, especially in a community studio. If you're in a community studio and you're sharing supplies, please, please, please think of other students, think of teachers, think of how you would like to see the tools yourself, because you know, the nicer you keep things, hopefully everybody sees the job you're doing and repeats after you. Through all that talking, this wax is dried. It's ready to go. So we can touch it, it's not sticky anymore, and the glaze will not stick to it. So now we've got one of our dipping buckets here, and this glaze is going to be a white glaze. And so inside all of our 5-gallon buckets here, and you may not be seeing my head now, which is fine, I only have a camera and no camera person, but inside each of these buckets here, I'm going to show you all real quick, but carefully, is a toilet brush. So this is what we use to mix our glazes with, and they're great tools. So if you're making bulk glazes at home using a glaze recipe, toilet brushes in 5-gallon buckets are fantastic. So the thing that you want to do is, in the very beginning, especially in a community studio, you're going to be mixing that glaze up really well. And get all the way to the bottom, get all up on the sides, stir that up really good. Because glaze is sedimentary, and so eventually, even with a commercial glaze, it all settles to the bottom. So whether you're making your glazes yourself or you're using a mix that's been pre-mixed for you and you're putting it in a bucket, and you want, ideally, your brush to come out almost clean. So if you saw the brush before and you're looking at it now, this is almost clean, and that's a good thing. Also, something you want to see, which I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to show it on the camera, hopefully we'll see. You want to see the glaze free dripping. So you're not really getting a good view of this. I'm trying to get as much to come up as possible. But you want to see free dripping. You don't want to see clumps because that means you need to mix more. A really great thing to do is the lid of your glaze, turn that upside down and put that brush on top. This prevents cross-contamination, especially if you're in a space with other artists. You want to make sure that your brush stays with only the glaze on it, the glaze that it came out of. So flip that lid over, put that brush on top, that way it stays nice and clean, covered with its own glaze. So dipping, there's a lot of different ways to dip, and this is just the way that I dip because it's the easiest for me. Now this is an opaque glaze, so it will not show any overlap. Glazes that are transparent, like Celadons, you are gonna see an overlap if you dip this particular way that I'm gonna do. I'm just doing a half and half dip. So really when I'm doing Celadon glazes, I personally prefer to brush my glazes on. I don't really like dipping my Celadons unless I'm only dipping it halfway. So. And that's just because you get a divide in the middle where you see that, here's my first dip, here's my second dip, and here's where the two overlap each other. I don't like seeing that too. Sometimes people do. I don't like seeing it with my Celadons, but opaque glazes tend to not, show that effect. So I've got my bowl, I'm holding it where I'm comfortable so that my hand doesn't hurt. The bowl is not too heavy. It's, I don't want anything to be dropped in the glaze because once it's dropped, then you've got to wash your piece off and let it dry and wait another day, usually a good 48 hours. You want to make sure that your glaze is well stirred right before you dip. And a good way to tell if your glaze is thick enough is I like to stick my hand inside, pull it out, and I'm not sure how well y'all can see this, but you can see the blue tips of the glove through the glaze. So the glaze coats the finger really well, but the blue tips of the glove are showing, and that means that the glaze is thick enough to hold to your piece. You want to make sure that your glaze viscosity is really good, because if it's not, then either your piece is going to get too much glaze. If the glaze is too thick and you can't see the folds of your skin through the glaze, then that means you're going to get running of your glaze, and it might ruin your kiln shelf. Or if it's not enough glaze, then it's not going to be shiny, it's not going to be thick, potentially also not food safe. So make sure that you've got clean hands when you're dipping. I'm going to hold my piece and I'm just going to go down, 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 then pull up before it touches my fingers. So here's my piece. I'm going to let it drip over the bucket so that I don't have to make a big old mess. And notice where we waxed, very little glaze content attached. Also notice this is a white glaze, but it shows gray right now. That's because the glaze doesn't change colors until it is reaching its temperature where the colors start to be produced. So whether you're using a low fire glaze that's going to 1,888 degrees Fahrenheit, or whether you're using a mid-range glaze that's going to 2,235 degrees Fahrenheit, either way, you're not going to see the color until it is out of the kiln. So people are like, oh, but this is supposed to be white. Well, yes, that's because what you're seeing now is the minerals and the chemicals and things that are on your piece. But while we've been talking, this has changed from a darker gray to a lighter gray, which means it's drying. And we want this to be as dry as possible before we dip it again. So I'm going to dip this other bowl. Both of these bowls are going to have a white base to them. Dip it in, pull it out. So notice the difference already in the colors of these two. So one is dark, one is light. This one's dry, this one's wet. You can also see this one's maybe shiny. Maybe you can see that with the reflection. So definitely don't want to re-dip this until it's not shiny anymore. A lot of people will be like, oh, I'm going to pick up my piece again, and they pick it up while it's still wet, and it messes up their piece. So don't do that. Also notice I'm setting my pieces bottom down. A lot of times people will be like, oh, I'm going to set this down like this, but that means you've messed up all of the rim work that you just did. So if you can, which is why I prefer doing a half and half dip, that way I can set my piece down gently without worrying about ruining the rims and things like that. So this one's dry now. I can touch this very gently, and it is dry. So now I'm going to dip my other half. And I'm just going to go as far as where my fingers were. So there will be a little bit of overlap, but because the glaze is very consistent and it's opaque, meaning we can't see through it, I'm not worried about seeing overlap. I will not see any overlap with this glaze, which is a great thing because I don't want any overlap. So what will happen is that people will see that most of their piece is dry like this, but they'll grab the part that's wet. So if you are going to pick up something, just make sure where you're touching it is not wet. Otherwise you'll be having to do a lot of repair work. And there we are. Both of these pieces are covered in glaze. All you need for a basic glazed piece, so if you're only glazing your piece with one color completely, one dip in a bucket is enough. Your glaze should be thick enough that one dip will get you the color that you desire. Now, if you're doing this at home, you're making your own glazes at home, please do test tiles. That goes for being in studio too. If you've never used colors before and you've never glazed before, practice with test tiles. Practice, what does one dip look like? What two dips look like? How thick is my glaze right now? Is it the thickness that the studio recommends? Is it the thickness that I am just really fond of? Do test tiles. Don't waste your good pieces on things you don't know or don't understand. So by all means, make yourselves little bowls, little cups, or just slabs of clay that you can write on and say, well, okay, this is my white glaze, this is one dip, this is two dips. Two dips, it ran. Now, this white glaze will not do that typically. But if a piece has too much water in it, a lot of things can happen in the glazing process. If glaze doesn't stick, it will shed off in the kiln and mess up your kiln shelf or mess up other pieces. If it's, it can shiver and flake away, and then it gets lumpy and you get pinholing. There's so many different problems that can happen during glazing that making sure that you have all your bases covered is ideal. Now, of course, accidents happen and you can do everything correct and something goes wrong. So in those instances, it's good to keep doing tests with your glaze to make sure it's not the glaze that's malfunctioning. It might even be the kiln that's malfunctioning. It could just be the humidity in the day, and maybe it was just too humid the day that you glazed and there was just too much water in it. Maybe your hands were really oily that day. That's one reason why I wear gloves when I'm glazing, is because I don't want my personal hand oils to get into my pieces. But other people, they bare hand glaze all the time and have no problems. So everyone finds where they're comfortable and what works best for them, and that's just through trial and error. And even some of the best efforts that I've put in before, I've had problems with glazing. So it happens. So don't, not every piece is going to be a masterpiece. Just the more you practice with a glaze, the more you get to know it, and the more that you can, figure out what does this glaze like, what does this glaze not like. Also, when you're done with your glazing, cover your glaze up, because it does, water is in it, it does evaporate, and also you don't want to cross-contaminate. So if you're using multiple glazes in a studio, highly recommend having only one open at a time. Now that these are done, I can wipe my bottom. All my students love when I talk about wiping my bottom, because I'm really good at wiping my bottom, and you should be too. So on the bottom of this, even though it looks like it's clean, where the wax is, there is still glaze. And if you do not wipe that bottom really good, it will stick to the kiln shelf, and you will be an unhappy camper. So make sure that your bottom's wiped, and depending on the glaze you use, if it is a glaze that likes to run, make sure that you're wiping a little bit up the sides too. Now this is a really nice, sturdy, opaque white glaze, and so I'm not worried about this running. I can take this almost all the way to the bottom with no, problems to be expected. But really nice wiped bottom, and these are ready to be loaded into a kiln and fired. That is basic dipping of glazes, kind of basic 101, how to dip your glaze. And that's with a single color glaze. You can absolutely open up, once these are dry, you can open up another glaze and then do a dip in a completely different color. I can make these half white, half blue. The blue and the white will have a chemical effect, so you will not just see blue, you will see blue with white showing through it, or whatever color you choose, you're going to see a color transformation with those pieces. So experiment with your glazes, have fun with them, practice with them, and by all means, this is meant to be fun, not stressful. Glazing is one of my favorite things to do. I love having fun with glazes, so by all means, once you are starting to feel comfortable with those glazes, go to town, because it's so much fun to do glazing. But that's it for this video. I hope that you found this educational, and if not, at least mildly entertaining, and I will see you next time. Thanks, bye.